Hello, my creative friends. Tonight I'm going to be doing a little drawing steps. I'm going to break down the shapes for you to show you how you can draw an owl if you're interested in drawing it. I'm just going to do a simple little version, and then I'm going to walk you step by step of how I do the watercolor. This is great beginner watercolor techniques and ideas. For those of you who would like to have a tracer, like maybe drawing's not your thing, but you love to paint, I do have a sketchbook membership, and all my sketchbook members, they get 3 different sizes. They get this 5x7 plus an 8x10, and these little mini sizes that look so sweet inside of a small little frame or put up in your cubicle. Sometimes you want to do something miniature and fun. You'll have the tracers for those as well. I know not everyone likes to draw, but maybe you like to paint, and sometimes you just need creative ideas. So I really appreciate all of those who've become sketchbook members. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you haven't become a member yet, come on over to my Ko-fi page. I'll have a link down inside of the description box, and you can go there. It's very reasonably priced to join and easy to join. There's no long-term commitment. So come on over, see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Well, let's turn this camera down and I'll show you the beginning drawing steps. Well, let's break down the shapes to do an owl. This particular owl, I'm doing a U shape. I like to kind of have it a little bit narrower at the top of the U, and then I like to kind of make it come out and be a little bit, I'm going to call it chubbier at the bottom. I like that nice roundness of that shape for my owl. So I'm going to have it to be a little narrower and then kind of come out in a round. Then for the very top, it's more of this like a smile face shape. So it's going to come up. That's what's going to build the top of his head and then his ears. Now to do the nose, it's just basically a carrot shape. So I'm going to find the center, do a little light line down to about right there. I'm going to start with that flat part of my triangle shape and then bring it down to a point. And then for the eyes, I'm going to come off to each side. I want part of my circle to touch on either side of my nose. I'm going to come up, and when I do circles, I like to do this little sketch motion with my hand. It just makes an easier process of creating a circle if I do this. If I try to do it all in one, my circles are never round. So this just helps me kind of guide my hand. Now I could come over here, do a light little line here. This is just going to be a little guide about how big did I make that circle. Then I'm going to come around to this side and do the same thing. Still doing that sketchy kind of motion to help create my circle. Now you could take a look. Do your eyes look big enough? Do you want to make them bigger? I added another outside circle, so I just followed what I drew because I wanted those nice big owl eyes on mine, and I've just followed it around. Now you can make this as a character, you can develop your owl character and add all the details you would like. Now this one, I did a little arch on each side. So I came here, made a little arch, came on the side, made a little arch. Then for the wing detail, I came off to the side. I started about right there on my eyes. I came in. So it's going to be another little arch shape here. I'm going to come in here. Now I can come over and make a little tick mark here so I know where I have that one. And I kind of want to end them and start them as close as I can, similar on each side. Come out and then end. And then before I were to put the details in this in the inside, I need to check to see if my wings kind of sort of look similar in size, and these kind of sort of do. And then I'm going to be making the feather shapes. For this one, I'm going to follow the outside, do 3, come back in, and I pretty much stay to the edge of my body that I drew. I'm going to come in 1, 2, 3 again, like that. These ones I could make a little longer if I wanted. And then for this one, I'm going to be following the same shape. I did it backwards this time. So I came down, went up, followed. It was just easier for my hand to do, I guess. And then I would do the same thing on this side. Now you can do the rest of the details however you would like, but I wanted to show you how I did the eyes. For the eyes, I wanted a little human kind of a look to it. So I was going to make a cap for his eye, like an eyelid. That. Nice big size. And then I went underneath with like kind of a U shape again, a little droopy U shape that came underneath. Whoops. You do want to test these to take a look to make sure they're kind of the same on each side, that one is similar to the other. They're never going to be exact. I just wanted to make sure I had some of this droop over here and some of it over there on each side. Takes me a little bit to get them even. Draw lightly at this step. I'm drawing a little bit heavy so you can see it, but if I were doing this on my paper freehand, I would do it lighter so I could erase it easier. Then to do the black part of the eye, I come down and do that little U shape inside to create the dark part of my owl's eye. Now the rest of it is just a bunch of details and a bunch of shapes. This is that same shape of like a little upside down U shape. You can add some bands in of color. So it's just mostly just coming up with those basic shapes and then adding all your detail shapes that you would like to add. Well, let's start on this one, and I'll start the watercolor process. For the watercolor step, I drew my image on the Canson watercolor paper. It's 140 pound. This is still considered a student grade watercolor paper, but I can get a lot of great results. I always encourage everyone to spend just a tiny bit more money on your paper and just buy the watercolor paints that you can afford. Watercolor paints come in a whole variety of degree of pigments, and so that determines the price of your watercolor. Today I'm going to be using Paul Rubens brand, and I have a nice little set here that it lasts a long time, so even if you move up to a more professional grade of watercolor, it's going to last you a long time. Now to do this project, I did try out a new brush. I'm using this Velvet Touch, a number 8, but what's different about this one is called a long round, so it has this very long end on it. I could get amazingly sharp, long lines, and because it has a little extra big belly there, I can hold more water. So this is a normal round brush, so you can kind of see how the sizes are different. It doesn't come as sharp of a point, and I really did enjoy using this brush, and it's a great little brush. You might want to consider adding it to your collection of brushes. The Princeton Velvet Touch brand, they do make a nice watercolor brush, and I've been using mine for a very long time. Now any of these things that I mentioned, I'll have links down inside of my description box. You can check them out and see if they might be something you might be interested in. I do receive a very small commission if you buy something, but it doesn't cost you any extra if you do purchase it from my links. Well, for this particular painting, I did use more of this down here, these colorations. The darker navy color I'm going to be using is called Payne's Gray. That's here. And then I used some of the greens, and then I used a variety of the golds and the browns and this pattern over here. I often mix my colors, so especially for this style of wanting to bring some of that fall element in, I did dirty my colors. So I might have laid on a coat of just one color, but I often went over it with another color that was toned down using some like burnt brown or the burnt siennas mixed in it, or even a little bit of black too, to add some more rich color to that area. So I'm going to be starting with basically a dry paper and then working my colors wet. These are going to be started out, the colors I'm mixing are going to be mixed to about tea consistency. They're going to be fairly light, and then more water, less pigment is what I need to say. More water, less pigment. But I'm going to be starting with those colors and layering them in. So you will see me mix some of my color like right out of my pan onto my palette, but it's fairly light. It's like tea consistency. You might see me dip into a variety of colors. So like I could be mixing them at the same time and then dipping it in. But I'm going to start first with my light color, and then I'll be switching to my next one. I'll speed this up so you can watch and paint along with me if you would like. I'm going to start out in that center band, and I'm going to be using kind of a rusty golden color. I'm mixing it very lightly, putting it on, knowing that I'm going to be doing additional colors of translucent color. Now I'm working on the eyes, and I'm just filling in the individual spots. I drew those lines in on pencil, and I can see where they are. And I kind of want to make that stripedy pattern with my colors. And I'm just adding those colors, mixing them as I go. I'm adding a little bit of the gold, a little bit of the rust color, and some of that russety brown too. I'm mixing it as I'm going. Now for that tummy, I'm going to drop down and do that area. The same rules apply with watercolor. The watercolor wants to float where its paper is wet, so I want to make sure I'm leaving some space in between my wet colors so my colors won't blend all the way together. So I bumped down to that lower tummy area to work on that. I had first layered in a lighter shade of the gold, went back with a darker one, created that darker area around the outside of the tummy area to create a shadow, but then I went back in and I rinsed my brush off with clean water, gave it a squeeze, and then softened those lines around that tummy area to create that nice little shadow area. Next up, I'm going to work a little bit on these birch trees in the background. Now, birch trees we think of as being white, but to get them to look and have a really nice white look without being just stark white paper, you need to add some color. So I'm taking the burnt brown color in my set and a little bit of the Payne's gray, watering it really lightly. There's not very much pigment I'm using. I'm choosing one side of the tree and adding the color to that area. And I'm following in with the lower branches, again choosing one side to put my shadows. And I'm just dancing back and forth between the burnt brown and that Payne's gray color. Oh, I forgot what it was. It's funny. I use Payne's gray a lot. I just couldn't find it in my head. Words are hard sometimes. And if you want to make sure that your areas are even lighter, you can lay some color down, rinse your brush off with clear water, give it a squeeze, and then you can go back in and soften those areas with that kind of clean water, dryish brush. It's a great way to soften those colors. Right now they're looking like they're kind of dark trees, but they're going to change once I add the background into the behind scenes of it. So this is just adding some color, so in the end it's going to look like a birch tree. With watercolor, your colors always dry slightly lighter, so now is when I'm going back and I'm checking some of my original areas to see how much darker I might want to go. So I'm adding a little bit more brown here to that tummy area, and it's really a good idea just to take the time, let your paint dry, and put on the layers. Watercolor is all about those translucent layers, and if you go too dark too soon, they become very opaque and almost chalky looking. So it's better to layer in your colors and slowly add your color. For these eye areas, I'm coming back in and I'm just basically choosing one side of those little shapes that I put in my eye to add that additional color to. So that way I'm going to have a dark side and a light side. And I kind of continue on with that rhythm when I'm finishing off my eyes. When I start the process of doing the wings, I need to leave that room or space in between my colors. If I just continually go down the wing and add the colors in the grouping that I want them in, my color will flow from one area into the other because it's very wet. So if I want my colors to stay separate, so I want the top one to be gold, the next one I want it to be blue, the next one I want it to be a darker brown, and then end with a gold again, I needed to paint them individually or separate and give some time in between those areas to dry. So then my paint wouldn't just merge into one another and come up with really super blended colors. So that's why I left some space and I went to my top and started the blue there. It was a hot day in my studio, so my colors dried fairly fast, but this paper is not 100% cotton, so there is a quicker drying process time with this. If you're using a cotton paper with 100% cotton, it does take a little longer for that paper to dry, and you can get some different effects and different looks with 100% cotton paper, but this one is a student grade. It does have some filler in it, but you can still get a really nice look with the Canson watercolor paper. And here I'm just putting that little bit of color on the bottom. I switched to that different round brush that I had told you about earlier with that nice point on it to finish off those little small areas. I found it helpful to have the small brush. You do have to get used to the fact that there is that bigger belly on the brush, so it does hold quite a bit more water. So you think that you're not adding a lot of paint there, but you can end up with a lot of water coming out because it does have that watercolor style of brush where the belly in the middle is bigger so it can hold more liquid. I'm using that little brush to create those little lines for the trees, for the birch barks. I'm using the same brown, darker brown, burnt brown color that I had used on my trees. I used that for the lines, as well as that color Payne's Gray for adding the lines on. This little brush worked really well to add those small little lines. To add a little whimsy to this little owl, I created little tufts on the ends for ears, and that little brush worked really well to get in those small little areas. I painted in 3 small areas of the tufts, but when I did my final detail work with my pen, I added more character to that area as well by adding more line work there. For around the eyes, I chose a color called Hooker's Green, and I created the little green circles around his eyes. I wanted that eye area to have a really kind of a pop of color, and I thought a bright green would work well. Animal eyes are very colorful, so I was going to make this guy's outside of his eyes a dark brown, and then I added a little bit of the black into the inside. I'm going to be adding some more detail with my pens in the end, and this is just the beginning steps. Now that the colors I had painted originally on his stomach area and those band areas are dry, I can go ahead and add the additional colors. I wanted to make sure there was some sort of difference in between my colors in those areas. So this one I'm making a little bit more of the yellow ochre color, but I'm going to be adding a little bit of the darker brown colors as well to add just a little bit of shadow to the outside. I'm putting in that shadow, but then I'm going to be washing out my brush with the clean water, giving it a squeeze, and then coming back in and then softening that shadow line. This is a great technique to be able to add a little bit of color and soften your shadow lines. For the next area, I wanted it to have a gray feeling, so I took some of my black color and watered it down. I don't have very much pigment at all, it's mostly water, and that's how I laid in the very first layer of that color, basically making that whole area a light shade of gray. And then I came back in while my color was still wet, added a little bit more pigment, created those shadow lines, and did the same thing by squeezing my brush out, rinsing my brush out, squeezing it out a little bit, and then coming back in and softening the lines. I so apologize for having my crazy hair in the camera. It was a hot day in the studio and the fan was going. So I had the fan going, my hair was blowing, and I did not realize it was creating an issue with the filming, but hopefully it's not too distracting and you can see what I'm doing. While I'm painting, I'm continually looking to see how my colors are drying and if I need to add more colorations. So on these blue colors on the wings, I'm going to be adding another layer. But the consistency is no darker than coffee consistency. I can still see through it kind of, but it's not too thick that it's just going to be in an opaque layer. I'm going to be adding just an additional amount of color on top of the blue area, the browns, and the gold. It's always going to dry lighter, so adding these little translucent layers really does make a difference when you're doing watercolor. The center of my eyes were dry, so I added another layer of the brown and the black. I was going to be adding some more colorful oranges to around the outside, but I needed to make sure that the centers were completely dry before I added any more of those bright colors. For the beak, I used the color Indian Yellow, which is an orange, bright orange color, but I did add in a little bit of the burnt sienna and to dirty down that orange. I really wasn't going for adding bright colors to this particular owl. I wanted them to have more of a fall feeling, so I was always adding another layer of color and not just using the bright colors from the box. For the leaves, I was going to be choosing the colors Hooker Green in there as well as a blue color called Sky Blue. I love those two color combinations mixed together. It makes a really pretty turquoise color. I was going to be having some of the leaves around the outside being painted more in a green color, just the Hooker's Green, but then mixing a little bit of the Sky Blue in to create kind of a soft little turquoise color for the additional colors of the leaves. So I was rotating that color around the outside for my leaves, one being the green, the other being the turquoise. I was going to be using that same blue, turquoisey, green feeling in the background for in between my birch trees, so I wanted to continue on with the leaves being the same color theme. To work on that background area, I just made a puddle of the green color and a puddle of the blue, sky blue color, and just randomly picked up the colors in that side of the box and just put them on my paper. It was still dry paper and I was adding wet color on there. I didn't want a lot of water because I wanted the color to not mix too much into my white birch trees. So I wanted to make sure that it was going to be a controlled color. So that's why I'm putting my wet paint on a dry paper. And I really did like the look of it in the end of having that green, blue, turquoisey color in the background and having the birch trees over the top. I went back to the colorful part of the eyes and then added a little bit more of the orange and the russet colors just to even brighten up that colorful part of his eyes a little bit more. I was going to be using a white color crayon to create a little tiny tick mark in my background. I wanted to keep the background just one basic color. I was going to be going over it with the Payne's Gray, but by adding the white tick marks with the color crayon, I was going to be creating an interesting texture. It's rather like dyeing Easter eggs if you've ever used a color crayon on your eggs before you dye them, and when you take them out of the dye, you can see where you've drawn. It works the same way. The crayon technique is a really fun way to add some interesting texture to your watercolor paintings. I used that new brush to create little tick marks on the tummy and added some line work to my owl in different areas, and it worked really well for that. I don't have a lot of colorful pens, so this way I was able to add small little line mark with just watercolor and using that brush. When doing the little tick marks, it's kind of like stamping when you're using that brush. You don't really want to pull it, you're just kind of laying the brush tip down, and that's what creates those nice little tick marks on my painting. Now on to painting that dark blue background. Some people want to know, why do I do the step, the background, very last? Well, the reason why I do it is because I want the bright colors underneath some of my areas. So I want that bright white paper to help me build the green of my leaves. If I were to do the whole background blue and then try to paint the leaves, you're not going to see them. So I need to negative paint around my leaves. First I painted the leaves, and then now I'm doing my background. I'm still doing where the paper is dry and I'm adding wet paint onto it. And the reason why I'm doing it that way is so I have more control of where my color is flowing. I don't want it to run all the way into my white trees. I don't want it to go all cover completely all the little green leaves. So by adding the paint on the dry paper, I have more control. And I'm hoping you can see the little tick marks, how they popped up now from where the color crayon was. It's just a fun way to add texture. I had given my painting plenty of time to dry before I started the line work process. I was going to be using my micron pens for this. The center of my eyes had dried kind of more of like a charcoal color, and I really wanted to bump the black up, so I used my micron pen to fill in that dark area. I bumped down all the way to a 0.1 nib size in my micron pen to add all the small little black details. I love adding line work that has wiggles and jiggles, and it feels to me like I'm adding even a little bit more whimsical nature to my painting. I focused all the black line work just on my owl, and I left the background just with the pencil and the watercolor painting. I liked the look in the end. I needed to add some bright white accents to my eyes, and I used my Jelly Roll pen to do this. Often Jelly Roll pens, I don't know, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but I felt they worked fine for this, and I love the little small tip, the pointy tip of the gel point pen. So I was able to go in easily, add those bright highlights to the little guy's eyes, and added a few little tick marks of white on his body as well. Well, let's go ahead and see what this little guy looks like all framed and sitting in my studio. And here he is, looking cute as can be. If you're new to my channel and you like doing arts and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a thumbs up, give me a comment. It really does help my channel grow. If you enjoyed this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out. If you might be interested in my Ko-fi sketchbook membership, here's a link you can click and go directly to my Ko-fi page. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.